The question today is, when can a police officer stop you and ask to see your identification? Well, the short answer is anytime he or she desires. But the bigger issue is, when must you respond? We're going to talk about 3 distinct situations in which an officer may ask you for ID. The first is when you're driving a car. If you're pulled over for a traffic infraction, you have an accident, or you're stopped at a roadblock or license check, the officer will ask to see your identification. Because you're operating a car, you need to provide it to them. And when he asks for ID, he or she is also going to ask for your proof of insurance and your registration. Failure to provide these documents could result in charges additional to whatever you may already have been charged with in terms of a traffic infraction. So if you're driving a car, go ahead and provide your identification. The second situation is when you're out in public. An officer can approach you just as any other member of the public and ask your name, but you do not have to respond. The officer may additionally ask you for identification, but unless that officer has some reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime or you are about to commit a crime, you cannot be detained and you cannot be forced to present your identification. Ask the officer, am I being detained? Am I free to leave? Or am I under arrest? If the officer forcibly detains you or tells you you are not free to leave, he or she must have some reasonable suspicion that you've committed a crime or are about to commit a crime in order to do so. In that situation, if you do not provide your identification, the officer may use that as a factor in determining whether to arrest you and what charges to give you. So in this situation, you still do not have to provide your ID, but it could work against you. Keep in mind this rule though: you never have to answer questions from police, and you never have to provide a voluntary statement to them. Always be polite, but always insist upon your right to speak to an attorney. The third situation is when you may be lawfully carrying a firearm. An officer in Georgia may never stop you solely to determine if you have a weapons carry license for the firearm that you're carrying. And this is whether you're carrying openly or concealed. The officer cannot stop you and ask for your identification, and in this situation we're talking about a weapons carry license, to determine whether you are lawfully carrying. Now the officer may stop you for some other pretense and then ask you for your weapons carry license, but politely let them know that you'd like to speak to your attorney before anything else happens.